Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast, Develop Technical Recall Skills, Spaced Repetition with Anki. My name is Carol Auth of SANS, and I will be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speaker is Joshua Wright, SANS Senior Instructor. If during the webcast you have any questions for Josh, please enter them into the questions window at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to turn the webcast over to Josh.
Hey, thanks, Carol, and thanks everybody for joining us here today. I wanted to do this presentation because, to be frank, I struggle with remembering a lot of things. And when people ask me about my job and they say, you know, your job sounds exciting, you hack into things, and I say, you know, yeah, I hack into things, but you know, frankly, my job is 99% just fail town all the time, and it's that 1% success that makes it all worth it. And one of the struggles of that is that I have a hard time grappling with all the things that I have to remember. There's so much that we need to remember, new things to learn all the time. And so I put this presentation together because I wanted to share some of the things that I've been doing that have been helping me get better at developing this kind of long-term retention and better remembering things, and I think is making me a better information security professional. So this is a picture of me, and this is my desk where I sit or stand every day when I'm going to work. And I wanted to share with you kind of like what every single morning is like. I'll open my email, I'll look at, you know, some articles that have come in and emails overnight, something like that. And then I start seeing things like, geez, I need to learn more about Docker Swarm and this Portainer thing I'm going to read about later, and Kubernetes and Terraform and Helm and Spinnaker, and should I memorize the command line articles to kube control, and what does EKS stand for again? Google for 15 minutes, and oh crap, I messed up my GitHub repo again, and I really need to read more about Docker Compose and YAML, and this syntax is strange, and AKS and AKV and Vagrant and Ansible, and you know, maybe I should learn Rust today, or maybe I should just keep doing Golang or PowerShell or new Python 3 features or Clojure. I don't even know how to pronounce that. This is all that happens in my head before 10 a.m. Like, there's so much that we have to learn, and frankly, you know, I get overwhelmed on a regular basis with all the things that we're supposed to be learning and developing, and how am I going to find the time for this, and what's really important to me, and how am I possibly going to remember all of this? It turns out that I'm not the only person that struggles with this, and that's why I wanted to put this presentation together. This is a problem that I've had to try to solve for myself, and I wanted to share some of the things that's worked for me. Now, if you're like me, this probably happens to you, you know, 50 times a day. I'll be doing something at the command line, whether it's Windows or Linux or whatever, and I'll be like, oh, how do I suppress new lines in awk? You know, I don't know. And so I Google it like you do. And then I found some, you know, rando Stack Overflow article, and I see the answer here. Oh yeah, use printf instead of print. Sure, okay, that's great. And then I do my little thing, and I get past it, and now I move on to the next thing. The problem with this, and I think that this is also something that happens to a lot of other people, is that I will forget what I did in 15 minutes. Googling something, cutting and pasting an answer from Stack Overflow, and then moving on is not something that I will ever remember. And this is a big struggle because I find myself Googling the same things over and over and over again. Sometimes I Google something, and then the only articles that I show up are things that I wrote asking for help about years ago. And this is a problem because I'm getting stuff accomplished, but I'm not becoming a better analyst. I'm relying on other people and random articles that may not be there in the future. I'm not building any skill. I'm not building any long-term recall. And so I realize and I recognize that this is a flaw in how I'm operating as a security analyst, and I wanted to get better at it. And before we talk about how to get better at this, I want to ask you a question. Now, this is not something that I want you to answer for me. If you want to share this, that's great, but I really want you to answer this question for yourself. What are your goals for developing a technical skill. Why are we doing this? Why are we working like this? Why do I want to get better? Now, your answers might be all over the place, and there's no wrong answers here. You know, maybe you are studying something because you want to pass a certification exam to prove competency. Maybe you want to build long-term recall so that you can work faster and more efficiently. Maybe you want to build some skills so that you can then build other skills to get more advanced in a certain area that you want to do work on. Maybe you want to be the subject matter expert that other people turn to when they need help. Or maybe you just want to develop career goals. You want to expand opportunities. You want to get a higher paying job or more responsibility or access to things that are more exciting for your work. You know, maybe after reading and understanding all this technical stuff, you want to run screaming and say, I'm out, that's it, I'm gonna go open a coffee shop or do whatever. There is no right or wrong answer here, but I think it's important going into this that you understand why you're doing it and what's important to you. There are no easy answers for what we're going to be talking about here today, but it's important to understand and to know why you're going into this, why you want to build more technical skill, why you want to develop better recall, why you want to take a class to become better at Python or better at incident response or forensics or pen testing or wireless hacking or any of those other subjects. You should know why you're doing into it, why you're going into that field, and that's going to help guide you as you go through all the stuff that we're going to be talking about today. Now, I want to talk about some of the things that I've learned as an instructor at SANS. I've been an instructor at SANS for a little over 17 years now, and I love teaching at SANS. I love meeting people that come to classes and teaching people online. I love the conversations. I love the emails afterwards. I love it when people say to me, hey, I used that thing that you talked about and it worked out great. And you know, it's very rewarding for me. And SANS is a great opportunity to be able to get technical skill in a short amount of time. Most SANS classes are 6 days long, and in that short amount of time, you gain a lot of technical skill. As an instructor at SANS, as a course author at SANS, I'm always very cognizant about people's different learning styles. And so I try to use deeply technical material. I use analogy, illustrations, and visuals, hands-on exercises. You know, I try to make things funny. I try to share relatable stories to help people understand it. And these are things that we do to make the material useful to you. And that's all great at SANS. But there's a problem, and this is critical of SANS, and I think it's important for us to recognize that so that we can get better. The good points about short-term focused training is you get a lot of exposure and build a lot of skill in a very short time, often just 6 days. The hard part is building retention. There is no easy answer here to how you can remember everything that you learned in a 6-day SANS class by reading a technical book, by Googling and cutting and pasting Stack Overflow articles. There's no easy answer. But there are lots of things that we can use to develop retention to make it a little bit better. Now, I want to talk about some research from way back in 1885. There was a philosophy analyst, his name, and psychologist, his name is Hermann Ebbinghaus. And he did some research way back in 1885, and what he learned is that within 24 hours of learning something new, you will forget 50 to 80% of that content unless you've used it again. Now, that bears repeating. Within 24 hours, you forget what you learned between 50 and 80% of that content if you're not using it again. This is called the forgetting curve. And so that curve gets worse and worse as more time goes on. By about day 30 from learning something, you only remember about 3% of what you learned. And to be honest, it's low-key depressing AF. You know, and by AF I mean as fudge. You know, when you want fudge because it tastes good, but you know it's bad for you, it's just empty calories, but you want it anyway. You know, it's low-key depressing AF. Okay, and this is rough. Because what it means is that if you go to a class, if you read a book, if you look at something on Stack Overflow, if you do some research, you are going to forget it unless you start repeating it or unless you start referring to that material again. This is just a reality. This is something that is human nature, but it is something that we can overcome. What Ebbinghaus discovered is something called spaced repetition. Spaced repetition theory is this. Within 24 hours, if you review that material again for 30 minutes, you reset your retention way back up to 100%. Now, that's fantastic, but here's the key. Every time you do that review of the material, you want to do it for a longer period of time. So spacing the interval of review for a longer period of time, maybe 24 hours later, maybe 72 hours later, maybe 7 days later, and you want to do that review for a shorter amount of time as well. This is called spaced repetition, where we review the material for a shorter amount of time with longer and longer gaps. And that builds long-term retention, not study, 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 cram, cram, cram for as long as you can keep your eyes open, but intelligently reviewing something for a shorter and shorter amount of time with longer and longer repetition. Ideally, with spaced repetition, you want to review something right before you forget it. And that will indelibly embed that for a longer period of time into your long-term recall. Now, if this sounds familiar, it's because it's what we use in elementary school education all over the entire world. So, good morning, class. Today we're going to review Chapter 4 and continue our study on early Republican Rome. Then we'll examine the Imperial Rome Empire with the introduction of the first Roman Empire, Augustus. Does that sound familiar? Does it sound like something that you might have studied in middle school or something like that? That's because it's the practice that teachers use all the world over. You review what you learned the day prior, and then that builds your long-term recall, and then you start adapting to that new material. This is something that we use all over the world because it works and because it implements this concept of spaced repetition theory. The problem is, in long-term classes, this is something we can do. We review what we learned yesterday, and then we learn something new. But when we compress a whole lot of material into 6 short days, it's very, very hard to do this because we don't have the opportunity or the freedom of time to be able to implement this spaced repetition theory. However, there are 2 key elements to optimize spaced repetition, and these are things that are a little bit counterintuitive, at least for me. One, a longer review interval, that means the time between study sessions leads to stronger recall skills. Not study every single hour or study every single day, but spacing that study period out to a longer and longer interval. That is what develops the best recall skills. And number 2, the review interval needs to be short enough so that you recall and remember those concepts with a minimum amount of time. Not longer study sessions, but shorter study sessions so that you can recall that information. Now, these things seemed a little bit counterintuitive to me, so I started asking different friends, different colleagues, rando people I found on Facebook groups, how do you develop these technical recall skills? And I reached out to 3 different groups of people. I reached out to some friends that are in pre-med programs or are now doctors, and I say, what do you do, or what did you do when you were a med student and you had to study and build on all the skills that you've learned and start consuming more and more and more information? I also reached out to some friends who turned me on to some polyglot Facebook groups. So polyglot, person that studies and adapts and can speak and use multiple languages. And there's some amazing Facebook groups for polyglots. And so I started asking people in these different groups, how are you doing this memorization? If you have to learn all these different languages, how are you doing it and remembering it again and again and again? I also talked to some applied math majors that works in physics and different complex engineering fields. How do you remember all these new skills? And what I heard overwhelmingly from all these different groups was this one tool, Anki. The best way to optimize study time is to use this tool called Anki. Now, Anki is a free tool. It's a flashcard application. Now, before you start dismissing this, hear me out. Flashcard applications seem like, okay, flashcards, like I know that, it's no revolutionary thing. The thing about Anki that's interesting is that Anki uses flashcards to implement spaced repetition theory, where you create your flashcards, and I'll show you that in just a couple of minutes here. And then when you review these flashcards, Anki remembers how well you did. And it optimizes the amount of time that you spend studying so that as you're getting closer and closer to forgetting something, Anki will then reintroduce a topic based off how you responded to how well you know that information. And so by spending a little bit of time reviewing content with Anki every single day, you can develop this kind of strong long-term recall by applying spaced repetition theory. Now, Anki is a free application for Windows, for Linux, for Mac, and for Android systems. You can get an iOS version from the iOS App Store, and I think it's like $20 or something. But you can also sync your flashcards through all these different services so that, like, you know, for me, I use a Mac day in and day out, but I'll use my iPhone or I'll use an Android tablet or a Surface tablet or something when I'm out and on the couch or whatever, and I'll be able to sync up and just kind of spend a little time reviewing these Anki flashcards that I've created. So this is, you know, a fantastic gem. I always say that Wireshark is the gem of the open source community. It's an amazing tool with a lot of amazing features. It's something that we would easily pay a lot of money for. But I'm starting to realize that there's a lot of other tools that are like this as well, Anki being one of them as well. So I'm going to show you what Anki looks like here. And so I'm going to start with just a little demo of what Anki looks like when we get started using it for the first time. Okay, so I'm going to start Anki here from the command line. You don't have to start Anki from the command line. Normally I start Anki from my Mac tray down here, but I'm going to start it using a temporary directory here so you see what it's like when we start Anki for the first time. So I'm going to start Anki here, and the first time we start Anki, it's going to ask you your language, okay, and then you confirm the language. And then Anki starts up, and it looks like it's a very simple tool, but it's certainly very powerful, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this Create Deck. Now, Anki has several study decks, and what I've started to do is create a different study deck for major subject areas or for a book or some kind of a broad subject area that I'm studying. So, for example, I have an Anki study deck for PowerShell, for Python, for Golang, for Rust, different programming languages that I'm working with. I've got Anki study decks for different technical books that I'm reading, or even photography concepts. When I'm not doing high-tech hacking work, I do photography. And so a lot of the photography stuff that I'm studying, the technical stuff is pretty easy, but memorizing all the different photographers over time and their work and kind of their contributions to photography, that is also a technical skill that I want to be better at. So I create my different Anki decks for these kinds of high-level subject areas. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a deck for pen testing, lateral movement. Okay. And now I'm going to click on this deck, and then I'm going to click on Add. And so I want to show you some tips to make Anki cards. Now, Anki starts with this basic flashcard type, but I don't use that type, and I recommend you change this basic type here to close or closure. Now, a close block is a mechanism where you give the flashcard some information, and then you mark some of that information as hidden. So it'll read as a sentence or a statement, and then when you're studying your flashcards, you have to fill in what the missing close block is for the flashcard that you're studying. Before we do this, though, I'm going to click on Fields. Now, this is a one-time change that I'm going to make here. You do this once for Anki, and then you can create as many cards as you want. But I think it's important to have a visual element with all of your cards, so let me show you how to do that. I'm going to go to Fields here, and I'm going to add a new field. And this field can be whatever you want it, but I'm going to call it just Visual. Okay, and now I've got another field here called visual. And notice how the visual part of the card is here. So every time I add a card, here's a text block, and then here's a block for more text or visual or whatever I want to add here. But there's one more change that I need to make. I'm going to go to Tools and then Manage Note Types. I'm going to click on the Close field, and I'm going to click on the Cards button here. And this is the format of a card where you can do styling, you can even get crazy with CSS and different colors and things like that. Anything you want to do with CSS is possible in Anki, which makes it really powerful. Here's the close block, and then the close block is going to appear on the back of the card. So this is the front of the card, the back of the card, and then I'm just going to add another block called visual. So I say open curly bracket, visual, close curly bracket, close curly bracket. Now you only have to do this once, okay? And now I'm going to close this. And now I'm ready to start adding my own Anki cards here. I'm just going to move this off to the side. And so now you would go and take any technical material that you want to study. Now, I have a PDF file from a new version of the SANS Tech 504 course that I've been working on, where I have a whole new bunch of content on lateral movement and things like that. And so with Anki, if you're reviewing some material, you might say, okay, here's something that I want to add to an Anki card. And so I might say attackers use springboard to attack other internal systems. Okay, so attackers are in lateral movement. Attackers use a compromised springboard host use a compromised internal host to springboard to attack other systems. Now, in a closed block, what we do, you select a block of text that you want to make into your closed block. So here I just highlighted the information, and now I'm going to press Command-Shift-C or Control-Shift-C on Windows, and notice how it adds it into a new closed block. And actually, you can do this multiple times and have multiple closed blocks in whatever statement that you're looking for. Now, what I also like to do is to have some kind of an illustration here. So I'm going to highlight this information on my Mac. I'm going to drag and drop it into the visual field here, and notice how it adds it right to there, and I'm just going to delete that image. Okay, and now I'm going to add that as a new flashcard. And then I would just continue on my way. Now, whether this is a website that you're looking at, or a PDF, or a report, or a book, or whatever you have as a resource, you would go through and add these Anki cards. Now, you would go through and even add technical information here. So, for example, I would say the syntax for the interpreter port forward command is port forward add -L local port -P remote port -R remote host. Okay, I'm also going to create a screenshot here. Again, same technique, and drag and drop that into my Anki card. So you can see how it really doesn't take me very long to create an Anki card, particularly when it's already open and I'm reviewing material. It only takes me about 15, maybe 30 seconds to create a card, but that will help me build that long-term recall. I'm going to add this card. Oh, Anki is warning me that I didn't create my close block because I forgot to create the close block, and now I'm going to add the card. Great. Now, you might say, Josh, sure, you have the PDF files for this class. It's easy for you to do that. My friends, I don't know if you're made aware of this because SANS has not made a big deal of it, but SANS has actually transitioned to ebooks with the whole stay-at-home order and everything. So if you sign up for SANS class, you actually get ebooks now, which I'm thrilled about because it makes this kind of work much, much easier at the same time. All right, so I'm going to go back to my Anki here. And I'm going to close that. And now I only have 2 cards, and ideally you'd want a lot of cards to be able to study from. But let me show you what this looks like. And just to hop through the presentation here, these slides are all just that procedure I just did, creating cards, drag and drop in the content, okay? And so now, when it's time to study with Anki, you say study now, and Anki shows you the text like this. In lateral movement, attackers use a compromised, okay, and then the close block. And so now when you're studying, you would say, okay, what's the answer to this question? And you want to do this in a minimum amount of time, not more than, say, I don't know, 15 seconds, okay? Attackers use a compromised springboard host to attack other systems inside a network for lateral movement. And then I would say show answer. And there are shortcuts for all these here, so you can just press space or click show answer. And it says, okay, the answer is to use a compromised springboard host to attack other internal systems, and then there's my screenshot, okay? And that was the little visual that I added using the customized Anki card there. Now, here's the real benefit of using Anki. It's not the flashcard, it's this down here at the bottom. How hard was it for you to remember that question? Was it easy? Was your recall pretty good? Or was your recall, no, I really didn't know that. I need to see this card again to try to reinforce my learning of that concept. So for me, this was easy. So I would say easy. The next card we had was syntax for the interpreter port forward command is, okay? So this is port forward -L local port -R remote port -H remote IP address, okay? And I'm gonna say show answer. Okay, and I was wrong, okay? So I got that question wrong. I see the right answer is port forward add -L, I got that right, local port, but it's actually -P for the remote port and -R for the remote IP address, okay? So -P 80-R and then the remote IP address. Now, I would say, should I see this card again, or should I see, was my recall good? Now, I might say for this card, you know, I got most of it right, I'm gonna say good. Now, I don't have a lot of cards here. I only have 2 cards in this deck. But Anki would then show you other cards to give you a chance to study other topics that you've not marked as easy. But because there's only 2, now it's showing me the question again. The syntax is -L-P-R. -L-P-R. Got it, okay? So now I would say easy. And now I've completed that study session. Now, this is the benefit of using Anki, that when you have cards like this, for any topic that you want to study, you can sit down for a short period of time and start reviewing that information. And Anki will intelligently start showing you those cards again and applying spaced repetition theory. Now, Anki knows that I marked a couple of those cards as easy, and it won't show me those cards again for 4 days by default. And then I'll mark it as easy and it will go away. Cards that I mark again as good, it will show me in my same study period, or again, will show me more frequently. And by doing this on a regular basis, I can build those long-term recall skills. This is much, much stickier. You're going to remember the content that you're studying by applying this spaced repetition theory much better than Googling and copying, pasting some random thing from Stack Overflow, or by sitting through a 6-day class and then never reviewing or applying that material again. Okay. So just to show you here, you know, how hard or easy was the question, the syntax of the question, and how you want to mark those things, okay? And so what you want to think about is, how can I apply Anki in my own study practice? Now, I mentioned this earlier a little bit, but this is what I've been doing lately. I have multiple Anki decks for common things that I want to get better at. I feel like I have a strong to very strong proficiency in Python, in C, and a couple other programming languages, but I'm very bad at PowerShell. And so one mistake that I use in PowerShell all the time is that when I'm doing comparison operators, less than and greater than, I'll use the less than and greater than symbols, not -LT and -GT, which is the correct comparison operators for PowerShell. It won't generate a syntax error, but PowerShell will start using the redirectors and creating random files in the file system, and that's happened to me a lot. So as I'm going through and I'm realizing my mistakes in code, I'll add an Anki card. Or the other day, I wasn't sure how to add an AppX package to PowerShell, and so there was I Googled how do I add an AppX package in PowerShell, and it's add-appx package, and so I added it to Anki. And so when I add that to Anki, I can continue doing my thing, I continue getting stuff done, but now I will review that card at a later time, and that will help me remember what's going on. Now, if you're sitting through a 6-day class, you're not going to have time to create Anki cards. You're going to have to furiously scribble and highlight and take notes, and I do the same thing. When I'm taking a 6-day class, I just take my notes and I do whatever I can to keep up with the instructor and to try to capture that information. After the class is over, then I am adding that stuff to Anki. And it takes a while because there's a lot of content, but that's all part of the learning and the memory retention process. If I'm doing a class and I'm doing it self-led, where I can take my time in that material, then I'm adding the Anki cards as I'm going through the material, because I'm more likely to think, oh, this is new and I want to add this. I didn't know this before. I'm going to add it to Anki so I can keep practicing to retain that information. Again, anytime you're Googling something and it's something you didn't know before, add it to Anki and build your own personal Anki deck that you can use to build these long-term recall skills. Then it's important to review your Anki content. Review your Anki material for 15 to 30 minutes every single day. What I've started to do in the morning when I've just sat down and I'm having coffee or I'm eating breakfast or whatever, I open my phone, I go to my Anki cards and I just review. And I don't spend a lot of time doing this. On each individual question, no more than 15 seconds. I try to see if I can remember it. That is the way we develop long-term recall. It's not by looking at it once, it's by doing it again and again and again. Now, how do we optimize that time? By using spaced repetition, so that almost right before you forget it, you're reviewing that material, and that's what Anki implements for us. And it's, again, this amazing gem of the open source community that I only found out about a few months ago, but it's helped me develop my long-term recall, and I feel like I'm significantly better at remembering things than I was before then. Now, there are two significant problems, however, that Anki does not help us with, that Anki is not going to solve for you. And these are the two problems. One is the problem of motivation, okay? If you want to retain knowledge, then you need to be persistent in how you are applying and remembering content, in how you're studying your information. And so I started talking to a lot of different people. I mentioned this polyglot Facebook group, and I was so thrilled to find these people. I only speak English, I'm not a polyglot, but I was amazed that people were very willing to help me and just stand up and say, yeah, these are the things that you need to do. You need 4 critical things to help motivate you. And these are the 4 things that I found by talking to a lot of people. You need to find your enjoyment. How do you find this enjoyable? I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation that my job as a pen tester is 99% fail town and 1% success. And that 1% success triggers an endorphin rush that is an amazing drug, and it feels fantastic. And I see it in my students as well. I remember there was a student, she was struggling with something in a class, and then I gave her a little nudge. I'm like, you're almost there. And then she did it, and she sat back and she had goosebumps, and she said, that feels amazing. It does. That's my enjoyment. You need to find your own enjoyment. Where do you get that from? By stopping an adversary, by being that resource for somebody else, by being the go-to person for people on your team for an area of expertise. You need to find where your enjoyment is in the topic that you're studying, wherever that comes from. You also need a method. You can't just flounder around and struggle and flip pages and okay, I'm learning. You need a method. You need something that you can apply, and that's what Anki gives us. So you need to invest the time into creating those Anki cards and then studying them and then applying them as you go through your material. You need a system as well. Habit development is necessary. You're going to need to develop a habit of study, and you're going to need to figure out what works for you, whether that is taking a little bit of time right before your lunch break, or right at 4:30 before you close up for the day, or whatever that opportunity is for you. You need to develop a habit where you're doing that consistently day in and day out. And then finally, you need to have patience. We all struggle with frustration. Frustration is a good thing. It helps us build that recall. It helps us get motivated, but it can also be detrimental to learning. It's a delicate balance between, I'm so frustrated that I'm going to throw in the towel and I'm just giving up in this field. And believe me, that happens to me a lot. I get frustrated. There are days when I think, I'm not good enough for this. Who do I think I am pen testing these people's networks? There's no way. I'm not good enough. It happens to all of us. And so you need to figure out a way to turn that frustration into success. And that seems a little cliche to sound, but for me, I try to turn that frustration into not I'm giving up, but into I'm not going to let this beat me, and I'm going to figure out a way to make this work. And so that works for me, but you need to find a way to deal with that frustration to turn it into something that's going to help motivate you, not prevent you from succeeding. So the problem of motivation is one thing that Anki doesn't help us solve. You need to figure out what your enjoyment, what your method, what your system, and what your patience mechanism is going to be. There's another big problem though, and that's the problem of time. Your time is a precious commodity. My time is a precious commodity. I understand that. There's never enough time for all the things that we want to do in this world, and so you need to choose what's important to you. Remember at the beginning of this presentation, I said, why are you here? Why do you want to develop a technical skill? What is your motivation? The answer is independent. That's going to be something that you're going to have to figure out for yourself. But the thing about time is that there's no easy answer here, okay? Studying Anki every day is going to demand your time. You may see a small decrease in your performance if you're spending, let's say, 15 minutes a day, half an hour a day creating Anki cards. That's going to require time. Nobody is saying that it's not. It's going to require time to develop your Anki cards. It's going to require time to study, but that time is much better spent. Think of somebody studying for a certification exam and cramming for a week, taking the exam, passing, and being like, woo, glad that's over. I won. I succeeded that. That same amount of time spent studying Anki is going to also give you long-term recall, but spread over several weeks instead of 1 week of just cramming. What's a better use of your time? Cramming for a week, or preparing with Anki, applying a system, and then studying every single day, and then developing that long-term recall that you'll be able to remember that stuff that you learned going forward, instead of just remembering it for the exam in 24 hours, you've already forgotten most of it. You need to revisit your goals. Why are you doing this? Why are you studying? And is it worth your time to invest? I don't know the answer to that. I think you need to decide that. I know how I feel about it, and I know that personally, I want to be a better pen tester. I want to be a better instructor. And so I spend my time learning how to be a better teacher, adult study techniques, adult learning techniques, things like Anki. These are things that help me because I want to be a better teacher, I want to be a better pen tester, and I want to pass along my skills to other people so that they can do more work and they can succeed more than I could ever do just on my own. That's my motivator. So you need to find out what your motivator is as well. You also need to ask, what changes can you make in your life, okay? I can't wake up any earlier. I wake up early every day, I exercise, I spend my time studying, I spend my time working, preparing, working on new SANS material like the 504 class. I can't wake up earlier every morning, but I can optimize that time a little bit. I can watch one fewer YouTube video or one fewer episode of, Tiger King, okay? I can, spend a little bit of time getting better at what's important to me. And so everybody needs to find out where that time is coming from. And one tip that I would offer is, how important is your time to your employer? Can your employer offer you some time to become a better analyst? If you develop better long-term recall, you're going to be a better analyst. You're going to be better because you're going to remember things in PowerShell, in lateral movement, in whatever technique you want to study, and you're going to be faster when you need it, as opposed to just Googling things because you can't remember that thing that you already Googled 15 times before but have never been able to retain. That's going to be valuable to you and your employer. So maybe talk to your employer about getting some professional development time, some PD time every day, to be able to say, you know, if I spend 15 minutes every day studying, then I'm going to be better in the long run for my employer. And maybe that's something that you can work out, where you can dedicate that time every day and then have that opportunity to become better. I kind of want to close this out with just, you know, a little bit of a heartfelt message, okay? Everybody on this webcast has some responsibility for information security, whether it's a small amount or a large amount, whether you are just starting or you've been a veteran in this field for a long time. You have some responsibility for improving the security of systems, protecting information. A quick story. My kids went to a school, and the head of the school called me up one day because she got an email and there was an attachment. The message said, you know, I want to apply for a position at your school. I've attached my resume. Resume looked like a PDF, but it was an exe file. She launched it. It was CryptoLocker, and it encrypted everything on her computer. She was also a photographer, and she had been head of school for this school for something like almost 20 years. Every single image that she's ever taken of all the students, of all of her successes at the school, was lost. Now you might say she should have had a backup. She did. It was attached. She lost that as well. And she called me up almost in tears, and she said, "What do I do?" And I said, "You have two choices. You pay the ransom or you lose your information." I wish I had a better answer for you, but I don't. She chose not to pay the ransom. Now that's not a unique story. Okay, that's not something that is unique to her or me. I'm sure all of you have stories that are as bad or as worse or much worse than that as well. But I remember that story because it was heartbreaking. Now, I didn't have any responsibility for her IT, right? I was just a parent at the school. She called me up because she knew what I did. And I wished I had an opportunity to help her, and you know, try as I might, there was no way to recover her data. And I always feel terrible about that. I worry about parents that take pictures of their kids and everything is digital, and then CryptoLocker removes any evidence of their child growing up and their time together. They have those memories, but they don't have that visual of that anymore. And that worries me. And these are just personal concerns, not to mention the devastation of CryptoLockers hitting city municipalities or big companies or, you know, government installations or anything like that. If we don't succeed at our jobs, consider what happens with me, okay? Organized crime wins, okay? Digital assets, things that are important to us are lost. People lose their retirements and their savings. And I don't think it's hyperbole to say, you know, cities could go dark and people could die. Our work is important. And I think it's important that we all support each other in what we're doing. And I love the poet laureate Maya Angelou's work, you know, and she has an amazing quote: "Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better." Right? And so I think that's important for everybody, you know, not just from like a social human rights perspective, but even from a technology perspective. We do the best we can with what we know. And then when we know better, it's your responsibility to do better. Guys, as part of the updated SANS 504 class, I wrote an exercise on using Anki, and got the okay from SANS to give it away for free. So if you go to that SANS URL there, no registration, PDF, here's the lab exercise. Because it's important to me, and I hope it's important to you, to be able to use this. And I want you to be able to use this to develop and build your better long-term recall skills. The SANS 504 class is going through an amazing update. There's a lot of great stuff going on there. You can find out more information, but really, I'd like to hear from you. If there's any questions, Carol's going to help me go through those in just a second. But I would love it if you want to reach out to me. If there are things that you're succeeding at that maybe I didn't cover, please let me know. I would love to share that message with other people. If you have struggles, and you know, I thought this was my struggle, but it turns out that it was everybody's struggle. If there are things that you struggle with, even if you don't have an answer, please let me know. I've heard from a lot of students with learning disabilities, things like that. And so, you know, if you have struggles, I want to hear about that, because it's great motivation for me to find new ways to help people as well. So please reach out to me, josh@willhackforsushi.com, at JOSWR1GHT on Twitter, down there at the bottom. Please reach out, and you know, if this was useful to you, let me know. And just thank you for being amazing human beings. Thank you for being amazing people. And I hope that this will be useful for you, and that you'll be better at learning and retaining all the technical things that we're inundated with on a regular basis. Carol, are there any questions that we should go over?
Yeah, thanks, Josh, for that great presentation. We do have quite a few, so I'll jump right in. How do you Ankify complex programming concepts? For example, complex process injection steps, kernel development steps, and they go on from there.
Yeah, okay, great. How do you Ankify? I love that as a word too. How do you Ankify complex steps, okay? You know, from a programming perspective, what I've started to do with Anki is I developed my own CSS style. It's not on the computer I'm presenting from right now, but I've developed my own CSS style to be able to have questions and then actually have code blocks in a different syntax with line numbers and things like that. If anybody's interested in that, just reach out to me and I can send you the CSS that I've been working on there. It takes a little bit more editing in Anki to be able to get it to look right, but for me, seeing code in the way that I'm used to seeing it in an editor helps me relate to it a little bit better. And then you can use those close blocks for any kind of content. And you can actually have multiple close blocks per question. And by default, Anki will show you all the close blocks when you hit answer, or you could hit space, 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 and then answer 5 different close blocks. So it's really just customizing the question based off the technical concepts that you're looking for. So I've done that for some complex programming things. For exploitation things, I started working on a ROP-based exploitation Anki deck, just to refresh myself on some of the concepts that I've forgotten over the years. And so I've been using that, and it's helped quite a bit. I've also found that with Anki, breaking things down into the smallest chunks is very helpful to me, because it's easy to become overwhelmed. When you have a block of code, you know, it's easy to become overwhelmed. And I always tell my students, whether you're, you know, reverse engineering assembly language code or Java code for mobile applications, or Swift or Objective-C or whatever language you're looking at, break it down to 3 lines of code at a time, and not more than 3. And I find that that's the right amount to build a micro understanding that then leads to a macro understanding. So those would be my tips. Use styling to your benefit, use multiple close blocks, break it down into a simple concepts, and then no more than 3 lines of code at a time. Do you have another question for me, Carol? Carol, hello? So guys, I don't know what happened. I guess we lost Carol, and I don't have access to the questions to be able to see them here. So I'm going to give Carol a couple seconds to rejoin here. But if I didn't get to answer your question, tweet it. Tag me in a tweet, and then I will spend some time answering that question, and I'm happy to answer that question directly. Oh, Carol, are you back here? Okay. Guys, I want to thank all of you for joining me here today. A copy of the slides on my website is available, so you guys can get those slides as well. And do me a favor, share the presentation or the webcast link. Sandy's going to put a recording up. I know this is early for West Coast US people, things like that. But hopefully you're able to apply this and use it and reach out. I would love to hear from you. Guys, thank you so much for joining me. Take care of each other. And I hope that you're able to use this to good effect in your own studies.
Hey, Josh. Josh, can you hear me now?